Conversations allow you to build the world with your own delicate hands. Each part allows you to tell the perspective from someone else's view. That dialogue, each and every little bit, Hello. For those who don't know me, my name is GameDevOne, and thank you for tuning in to a better formula for game creation. In this episode, we're going to be making a dialogue system, and at the end, you'll be able to create passages that have 3 or less branches, so the player will be able to make choices inside of your dialogue system. You'll be importing a JSON from Twinery all the way into Godot, and we'll be converting that JSON file into what the player will see on screen. So, I have a present for you. We're going to start off by going to the Twinery.org website. It starts you off with no stories, and you can come in here and you can start writing your stories. I'm going to go back to the home page and import my story. JSON will allow us to put our story into JSON format, which is important. I'm going to go ahead and head over to JSON right now. Add this URL to this story format. We'll go back to the home page and we'll go to our formats. From there, we can add a new format. I can go back to the story. I have to actually go to change story format in my story and hit JSON. And then when I hit play, it'll give us an entire page with the JSON format. Copy and paste this, Control C, Control A, into a new file, a new JSON file. Then let's go ahead and open up a new Godot project or a new scene. Create a control node at the root called dialogue. Next, we're going to ensure that the JSON is in our project folder because we can't normally see where it is when we're running Godot. Create a new class called passage that will have 3 variables, a string holding all of the text of our passage, an integer for the ID of the passage in the JSON, and an array of links to the next passage. Create a new class called passage_link that will contain a string holding the name for that link and the passage ID of the next link. Create a node called JSON parser and attach a script. It's going to contain a string that's the file name that we want to read in, an array of all the passages, and a dictionary of the parsed JSON objects. When the JSON parser is ready, we're going to load that JSON file into the parsed JSON object. To load the file into the JSON object, we're going to need a string and we're going to need to return a dictionary. So create a new file and open it with this file pattern. This will ensure that no matter where we have the file installed, it'll know where to look for the JSON file. Next, we need to get the file as text and parse it into a JSON parse result object. After which, we can close the file for good practice and return it as a dictionary. The next thing to do is to verify that our parsed JSON object actually was created by Twine and then convert it into the passage object that we created before. To verify the parsed JSON object, we're going to need the JSON as a dictionary and we're going to return a boolean. Check to see if the JSON has a key called creator, and if so, we're going to check if that creator is Twine and return true if so, otherwise it's false. To convert it into passages, again, we're going to need it as a dictionary. Get all of the passages from the JSON, and for each passage in that JSON, we're going to create a new entry. That entry's text will be the stripped down version of the text we get from the JSON. Passage ID will be the passage ID directly from the JSON. And for each link, we're going to create a new entry link. That entry link's text will be the name of the link, and the PID will be the PID, after which we can add those entry links into our links. And when our entry is complete, we can add that to our passage array from above. To strip the links from the text, we're going to need the text as a string and we're going to return it as a string. We know that each link starts with 2 open brackets, so we're going to find the starting index for those 2 open brackets, for which we can then grab the text as a substring. After we have the substring, we're going to strip the substring from this entire text and return the result. Now that we've written some code, we can go and test our JSON parser. We can go back out and enter a file name for it and then click play. Under the remote tab, we can go and see all of the objects that were created with our JSON parser. You should be able to see an array of passages, and inside of those passages you should be able to see the text for the passage ID, and the links to other passages. To show our dialogue on screen, we're going to need a label to display our text and 4 buttons that'll display each option. If you want to see how I set this up, there'll be a link in the description with the project. Let's go ahead and create a script for the dialogue control node. We're going to need some shortcuts from the objects that we previously created. First is the passages in the JSON parser. Next will be the label for the dialogue to be shown on screen. After which, we'll need the shortcuts for all 4 of the options that we want the player to be able to select. And lastly, we're going to need a variable that indicates the current passage being shown on screen. When the dialogue node is ready, we're going to change the dialogue to the current passage. To change the dialogue, we're going to need an index of the passage we want to switch to. We're going to set the text of the dialogue label to the passages label. And then we're going to enable and set the text of each button based on the number of links provided in the passage. This diagram should provide a simplified example of what's going on depending on the number of links in that passage. And lastly, we're going to set the current passage index to the index that we passed in. You should see some text in your label, and you should see all 4 buttons with at least one of the buttons showing the name of the link from the passage. But none of the functionality works. We want the player to be able to click one of the options and it move to the next passage, so that's what we're going to work on next. Go ahead and connect your first option button's press signal to your dialogue node. We're going to be searching through all of the passages in our array to look for the next passage. So we're going to need the current passage using the current passage index, the next passage's ID found from the current passage's first link, and the index of the found passage, which we're going to start at 0. For each passage in our array of passages, check to see if the passage ID is equal to the next passage ID. If so, we're going to change the dialogue by passing in that index. Otherwise, we're going to move to the next passage. Do the same for each option button, making sure to change the next passage's ID to the corresponding link in the current passage. And there it is. Our dialogue system is complete. We're going to be able to advance our narratives through a single option or through multiple options. That in itself is going to allow us to create such interesting gameplay on its own. And if you ever need to edit your story, you can go back into Twine, make your edits, export it as a JSON, and then place it right back in your project. You want to know what other thing is going to make you a better game developer? Polish. Those are my friends at the end of the video playtesting my game, and they gave me some things to think about. Should or shouldn't the player be allowed to control how fast text reads, either via a skip button that allow them to skip text completely, or be able to control how fast the text is scrolling across the screen. Proofreading is really important because players are going to read every bit of text, and if they will find something wrong really quickly. Making sure to give a lot of signifiers for the people who are talking in the conversation. Otherwise, my readers or the players won't know who is who. And lastly, now that I've made this dialogue, there are 2 ways I can pivot to make it more robust or make a game out of it. I can go visual novel style and add a bunch of options that would allow the story to change over time, Or I could go more RPG and add combat and shops and things as such. For those who've made it to the end of the video, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new about making games. It's always important to get feedback while you're making these things. So if you have any feedback or comments, leave it in the section below. And I'll see you guys later.
Select.